All right, welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about Intro to Python and PyTest for test-driven development. In the first portion of our lecture, we'll be mainly focusing on Python. We'll be covering the data types in Python, how to establish a variable in Python. This portion should go pretty quickly since it will be very similar to what we covered yesterday. We'll also be covering control flow, conditional logic, ternary statements. Not sure why this is on the same line, so I'm gonna go ahead and erase that. Then we'll be covering over lists versus tuples, some of the key differences, things that we need to ensure that we annotate and keep in our back pocket. Then we'll be covering dictionaries versus sets, when to use each one, and why these data types are different and exist. And then finally, we'll cover our different methods for iteration, which there is going to be quite a bit in Python. All right. In the intermediate portion of Python, we'll be covering switch cases, or lambda functions, functions such as map, filter, reduce, and sort. We're going to understand how to build try and except to handle errors. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and talk about relative versus absolute paths and how paths work in dot notation with Python. And then we'll be covering the open function to actually be able to work with different files within Python. So that's what we have in store for this morning. In this afternoon, if we cannot get to it in this morning, we're going to be covering PyTest. First thing we'll be covering will be installing PyTest, which will be much simpler than what we experienced yesterday with NPM and Jest. PyTest will be a pretty easy install into our machine. We'll then be covering some of PyTest syntax, the common errors and the capabilities of PyTest. We'll talk about monkey patch and capsys, what exactly it is that those two functionalities do. One of them is a decorator that works with PyTest, while capsys is something that works directly with Python itself. And then finally, we'll talk about test-driven development with PyTest as our testing framework for unit test. So that's what we have in store for today. At this point, does anyone have any questions over any of the material that we'll be covering today? All right. If there aren't any questions, let's go ahead and get started. Let's kick this off. We're going to go ahead and kick this off by creating a Python file where we'll actually be writing all of our code. And actually, I jumped the gun. Yesterday, we covered that when I run Git, I get a little bit of help from Git telling me, hey, yeah, this exists inside of your machine, but you need to give me some command. When I type in node, it executes a it gives me a JavaScript interaction, a console, where I can go ahead and say something like hello and write actual JavaScript, kind of like a playground. All right. Well, Python offers the same thing. When I type in Python, we'll see these three arrow brackets pop up. It's going to tell me which Python version it is that I'm currently working with. And once I'm within these three arrow brackets, I can also type in regular Python. So the equivalent of console.log in Python is going to be the print statement. Now they're completely different, right? Yesterday we talked about how JavaScript is important inside of the web, but we haven't covered what exactly is it that Python can offer for us or what it's used for. Well, Python is an extremely versatile language and it's used for a lot of different things. Not necessarily for front-end web development. You're not going to write a Python script that will be executed upon some sort of user interaction or a user clicking on a button. That's going to be covered by JavaScript. But what we're going to be utilizing Python for is for building our APIs, building responses. We're going to talk about how we can utilize Python to read files, work with separate data, and manipulate data or clean a CSV file. Now, Python has become very popular over the last few years. It's one of the most used languages when it comes to pretty much everything. You want to go into data science, you're going to find that if you search up courses on data science, most of their introductory courses are in Python. We'll be covering Jupyter Notebooks and how that works later on, but it's all based off of Python in itself. Here in this course, we're going to be utilizing Python to build our actual API endpoints on a backend server, which will process API calls for our websites and our projects, which we'll talk about exactly. Actually, we can look at a small demonstration of what an API is, and we covered this yesterday as well. So here we have a Pokey API. Now I understand that this is my front end, right? And this is a front end framework. I'm able to I'm able to click around, do things here. But this part where I'm actually sending information over the web, I'm trying to send a request. It's giving me new data. Where is all this data coming from? Well, this data isn't coming from some magical place, and it's not inside of some massive JavaScript script that they have, or some JSON file that's just holding all this data. More than likely, they have a server that attaches to a database. That server can then talk to the database to grab all of this information pertaining to one specific Pokemon, depending on an argument. And that's what we'll be utilizing Python to build, is our own server that will respond requests and interact with our database. Other than building our server, we'll also be utilizing Python to build models. Models are built for learning purposes. It's essentially AI, right? We're going to be building different models that will be able to make good estimates, guesses, on depending on the conditions that we pass into that model. But we'll get more into all of these other topics later on in the course once we get into those independent modules. So that pretty much covers why it's important for us to learn Python today. And like I said before, the reason why JavaScript is a little bit gives us that console.log is because it also falls within the console. All right, here I have console inside of my web. I can say console.log, hello. Well, Python is typically going to be ran in the server side, or something that doesn't actually interact with the user. So instead of utilizing the console statement, it just provides to us the print statement. And the print statement works almost exactly the same. Wherever Python is being executed, we will see the results of the print function there. So you can see I'm calling the print method. In between those parentheses, I have a string saying hello. When I press enter, I get back hello. All right. Does anyone have any questions over Python up to this point?
Yeah, Francisco, I'm sorry. How did you turn your terminal to the Python mode?
Yeah, to turn my terminal into the Python mode, I just typed in Python. If you have alias correctly, it should open up this Python mode for you.
So just Python and that's it?
Yes,
Yeah, I'll try. Thank you.
of course. All right. So now, again, this is useful as a playground, just like my console was yesterday when I was working with Node, but my files aren't being saved and they don't necessarily exist anywhere. So in order to create a script that I'm going to be able to interact with, change, and not lose any data from, I would have to create a file. Can somebody tell me which command would create a Python file?
Python would be the same as like code. So you type in Python testing.py.
So you're saying to like type in python testing.py?
Yeah.
It should be with touch in the beginning. Touch
Oh yeah,
test.
touch.
Got it. So touch is my command that works with my machine, right? This is, we're talking about Unix here. So touch is going to create an independent file. And let's actually take a look at example.py, which will create Python code. Oh, and let me move that into the correct directory here. And this is directory 4. All right. Okay, so there I see that I have my example.py, and let me go ahead and make an example.txt. All right, so an example.txt I'm going to go ahead and write that same print statement. And I want to see if Python will be able to recognize it and execute it. Well, if I run python example.txt, we can see that Python was able to actually execute this file. Again, all files are just text files as far as my machine knows. Python is what's actually executing the code in within. Just like yesterday when I tapped console.log hello, it was able to work properly, right? Well, if I switch this to console.log and I try to run Python, we see we're going to get an error saying, hey, I have no idea what console.log is or what it means. But if I run node on example.txt, well, console.log works. Again, this is just a text file. All files are interpreted as the text files as far as my machine knows, but it's Node and Python that turn them into executable languages for my machine. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and remove that example.txt just so that it doesn't get in our way. And I'm going to open up example.py. All right, so example.py is now open. And I can go ahead and write some Python code. I'm going to type in print. We can see that because I have that .py at the end, VS Code is saying, oh, you're trying to write in Python. Let me switch all of your settings over to Python now. So here you can see that there's my Python working down there. It's trying to tell me, hey, this is, yeah. So it tells me my language mode. And here I have a black formatter as well. And then I turned off auto completion, it looks like, which I strongly recommend that if you're just getting used to both of these languages, you're not utilizing that autocomplete tab too much. Try to type everything out manually. Yes, it's going to slow you down, but it's going to help a lot with that muscle memory. I know that this is just typing, but it goes a long way. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and print hello again. And now in my terminal, if I type python example.py, we see that we get hello being executed from my script. All right, does anyone have any questions about how to create a Python file?
So I'm trying to follow along, and when I did the text, so I started late, whatever. But when I was trying to do when I switched it to Python code on the terminal, and then try and create a Python file, it was saying error syntax. So how do I guess clear out Python so I can make my Python file
Yeah.
in my terminal?
Can I answer this question?
Of course.
Okay, can you please first make a directory? Okay. Make directory, okay,
Oh.
and give it any name. And inside this directory, just create your Python file in normal way, regular way, like touch, space, and this the example.python. It will work with you. That's right.
Yeah,
So-
so I think the question that was being asked, and that's a great answer. Thank you so much, Murad. But I believe the question that was being asked is once I enter the Python terminal, just like I am in here now, how do I exit? Well, I'm gonna go ahead and exit utilizing the exit function there. And that exits out of Python. So it gives me back my Unix commands.
Got you. Okay. Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions?
Yeah, so you mean Francesco? That's what I did. I created a directory. I make the Python file, and then to work on this Python file, I switch my terminal into the Python environment. That's right. That's what you mean?
Yeah. So
Okay.
that's not the same question that Chris was asking, but what you're saying is correct. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course. All right. So now I'm within the same directory as my Python file. I can now work with Python. I have a file that I can work with. I can execute Python utilizing my alias. Everything's working up to speed, and I can go ahead and move forward into talking about types. Well, you're going to realize that there's a lot of syntax or a lot of commonality between JavaScript and Python, right? With very small differences. So for example, yesterday, when we were making comments, we're utilizing these two backslashes. And as you can see now, that's actually throwing an error. Well, when you write in Python, in order to make a comment, you're going to go ahead and utilize that. Oh, man, I hate to say this. It's probably because I'm on the younger side, but I'm going to go ahead and call it a hashtag. I need to figure out what the actual name of that symbol is. All right. So
it's the pound symbol, but
ah,
it means hashtag now. I think it's a modern colloquial thing now. It's hashtag.
all right. Well, we're going to utilize the pound
If-
symbol. Thank you so much.
If
for
you really want to get old, I believe the proper term is an octetet or an octet or something like that.
That's-
Octet.
Yeah, that's too old. Let's bring it back to the pound. We'll keep it there. All right, so we have our pound sign now, and our pound sign is actually going to allow me to write some comments inside of my code. Now, yesterday we were utilizing type of followed by a specific data type in order to receive what that data type was. Well, Python has pretty much the same functionality. I can utilize type. I believe is type. Yep, I can utilize type and pass in 1 in there. And if I do my print statement here to figure out what that is, well, when I run Python, oh, hello, that was the wrong Python. Python example.py, we can see here that it's telling me, hey, this is a class type and it is an integer. A class type integer. Well, that's pretty interesting. It's telling me that this is a class. We'll learn next week that Python is actually an object-oriented programming language, or it can be utilized as an object-oriented programming language. You could also use it in a functional base. It's not recommended. Once we learn OOP, I strongly recommend that you go back to the problems of this week and you try to turn all of your functional programming into object-oriented programming. But without going too much more into it, let's see what happens if I type in int. So when I type in int, my VS Code is already trying to give me quite a bit of hints here. So it tells me, hey, this is an integer. This is an integer class. It tells me how to convert things. So it goes, you can convert a number or a string to an integer. So that's good to know. So that means a number. Well, yesterday when we were learning JavaScript, a number was just a number. That covered pretty much everything. Well, that's not the case here for Python. In Python, if you try to write a decimal or anything that has a point something, when you execute, you'll see that you actually get a float class, right? So numbers aren't just numbers in Python. It doesn't fall under both things. We actually have floats and we have integers. They're not mixed into the same class. All right, well, let me go back to this integer process here so I could read it a little bit more. It's telling me quite a bit of other things. So for floating point numbers, this truncates towards 0. So that's important to know. So that means that if I have a floating point number and I utilize the integer converter to try to turn it into an integer class, it's going to truncate it towards 0, meaning that it's going to be the equivalent as math.floor. All right. If x is not a number, essentially just get thrown an error. Please feel free to read through this. But the real usefulness of that information here is going to be when you click command on your computer, if you're on a Mac. I'm not sure what the command is on for WSL users, but
Control.
control, perfect. So on a Mac, if you hold down command and click on the class itself, it's going to show you the class and a couple of its properties. And if you continue to scroll down, it also shows you some of its methods and the different things that it can do. All right. So that's really useful. If you find it hard to read, you can always just go to MDN. In MDN, they usually have a lot of useful tutorials as far as all the built-in methods. Again, just like yesterday, we're not going to be able to go into every single built-in method for all of these data types, since as we know, that would be a considerable amount of information. So there we have our type for 1.3. And if I print a type for 1, we're going to go ahead and get that integer. And that's going to cover our numbers. We haven't gone into operators or methods yet. Right now, we're just covering types. I see we have a question. Go ahead, Murad.
Yeah, I'm just because I want to work with you step by step. Now I'm trying to put the same command that you put, like print type 1 to show me in the console that's type of data is integer, and the second one is float, but it didn't show in the console. Do you have any idea why?
I wouldn't be able to guide you through the process, unfortunately, unless you were sharing your screen. I could actually see your code. It's likely a syntax error or maybe something else.
There is no syntax error. I'm just typing, but it didn't. I don't know why it didn't show in the console anything.
Yeah, no, I definitely.
It's okay. It's okay. No problem.
Yeah, if you're going ahead and coding along, which, definitely acceptable if you decide that you want to code along, try to put your questions inside of the X-ray questions channel so that I could answer them in between breaks.
Okay.
I won't be able to answer them during our lecture, but thank you so much, Murad. Go ahead, Brandon.
Thank you.
Sorry, quick question. What is the extension you're using when you mouse over the integer where you could see all the description?
I don't think I have an extension there, but let me try. I'm assuming you're asking because when you do it, it doesn't populate.
Yes, it doesn't do the same thing. And I wanted to know.
Nice. Yeah, so it looks like I have this Python extension here, which restart extensions. Nope, I don't want to restart it. Why would I want to restart it? Yeah, so it looks like I have this Python extension. There's also, I think there's one for PEP8. Yep. Oh, but I don't have it installed. So there's one for PEP8 as well that you can install, which actually, why not?
I have the Python and Python debugger extension, except it just doesn't do the same thing that yours does.
I wonder what else it is that I have. Let me take a look at my current extensions. Jupyter, there's Python. I have this black formatter. That's the one I just installed. Oh, there you go. Pylance.
Thank you.
Of course. All right. No, thank you for asking that question. I apologize, everybody. I should have pointed that out. So there's those three extensions. There's the black formatter. Oh man, let me go back here. So I have the Python debugger. I have Pylance. I just installed PEP8, so we'll see how that goes. It does have a considerable amount of downloads, and that's a pretty good way to judge if something's good. If it has a good amount of downloads, it means people are using it. Usually, if that many people are using it, then it has a usefulness to it. And then I think and the black formatter. This one's also pretty helpful. All right. Let me go ahead and close all of these extension tabs here. We've gone over types at this point. The next portion that we're going to go ahead and start talking about is going to be our strings. Well, just like yesterday, strings can be written in quite a bit of different ways. So I'm going to go ahead and do this print type. All right, so the first one, this is a string. This is a string, but you have to escape apostrophes, and excuse me if I'm not spelling that correctly. I know I'm not spelling it correctly because my extension is telling me I don't know how to spell. All right, and then there's 3 quotation marks. I am also a string, but you'll notice I look a lot different in the terminal. And then finally, we have our interpolated string. I am a string, but you can write Python code in between brackets. And let's just keep it nice and simple with 4 plus 4. That's not it. All right, I'll have to remember which what the keyboard shortcut is for wrapping text. But now we have all this information. Let's take a look at what it looks like when I run my print statements here. Well, when I run example.py, we can see even though they all come with different annotations for string, they are all identified as pure string classes. Well, let's take a look at their actual content here. All right. Well, when I run my example.py now, we can see the first one. This is a string. This is pretty normal, what we expected. The second one is, hey, this is a string, but you have to escape with apostrophes. We covered it yesterday. If I did something like ain't, it kills my string and causes a syntax error. So I have to escape that key. And I escape characters the same way with a backslash. All right, so there we can see ain't. Again, that special character is ignored and does not show up in my print statement. Now this triple quotes, well, notice that the triple quotes, and let me just put here start, and let me put here end. Now the triple quotes is really special because of the way it prints into your terminal. So you'll see that this is the start of the string. So it starts right there at the very beginning. But then when I press enter, the next line stops with the exact amount of black space that I've located there. Right? There's also an indentation and a whole other line of black space. Then we see the third line show up there. Excuse me, the fourth line. Nope, that was the third line. I apologize. We see the third line show up there. Then finally, we could see the fourth line with 0 regards to black space and still showing up the same exact way that I designed it on my terminal. All right, and then finally, we have our string interpolation. String interpolation, this will be marked by this F. And in JavaScript, you can only do string interpolation utilizing the back quotes. Well, in Python, you could do string interpolation with any of these string formats. They just have to have an F in front of them. As long as you have the F in front, you can write regular Python code within the curly brackets. All right. Does anyone have any questions over this material covering strings up to this part?
Yeah, when we use the triple quotes,
When would you use which type of codes?
that triple one, this when we make the big text.
The triple ones? Oh, got it.
Yeah.
So if I'm making some sort of menu, like a terminal-based ran program, I remember when I was when I was job hunting, I got asked to build a program that was terminal-based, and they wanted to have like specific visual effects and ways that I wanted it to display. Well, rather than having multiple print statements line by line that don't necessarily do what I want it to do and take a considerable amount of elbow grease to just get maybe these black dent indentations to work correctly, I could just do it with triple quotes. And then that way I have one specific variable holding my entire menu rather than doing it over and over again. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. I see another question here from Earljon.
I just saw this from other people that like they use the triple quote as part of the comment, which console doesn't run. Like,
Yeah, that's
so,
a good question. Oh, go ahead. Keep going.
I don't know. Yeah, you know.
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. Let me see if I can find a simple example here. I wonder if they did it here. They did not do it there. So you'll see triple quotes also be utilized to leave behind comments of some sorts. If you have a really complicated function, it is not uncommon for developers to just leave string such as this and leave a small explanation of what the actual function is doing or what it needs to work. Right, so I could still do it just to leave behind comments. It's not being utilized anywhere. I just have it within my script. It doesn't really hurt your efficiency to do it this way at all. It's as soon as the script is done reading it, when it's being executed, it's dumping that data. So it's not like you're occupying unnecessary memory space. You're not saving it onto a variable or anything. It's there purely for other developers to take a look at. Does that answer your question, Arjun?
Yes, thank you.
All right, and at this point, I'm going to be going through the chat here. I see there's a couple of questions. So does Python have any functionality inside of HTML? I don't think I ever heard of Python scripts being able to run inside of HTML tags, but figured I would ask. So depending on the framework that you're using for development, such as, and I'm not sure if somebody already answered this, but if I'm doing something called server-side rendering to render my static files with Django, I can make HTML templates within Django that will reference Python code. We won't be covering that during this course, but once we get to Django, if somebody would like to send a reminder, I'll be more than happy to send some resources as to how you could do that. The next question we have is it recommended we code along during this lecture or just pay attention? If you decide to code along, you definitely can, but if you run into an issue or get stuck, don't try to figure out the issue. Just stop coding along and start paying attention. If you're trying to debug at the same time I'm teaching, by the time you figure out how to get whatever it is you're working on debugged, I'll be long gone. The next question we have is from Chris. The pound sign are not commenting out my previous code. Do I need to enable something? Interesting. I'm not sure why the pound sign wouldn't comment out your code, but you can highlight, hold down Command / and it will comment the script as well.
Yeah, so when you have the print type 1 and print type 1.3, I put those comment or the hashtag or a pound, sorry, to the left of them for each line, and yeah, it still showed up as like bright letters or whatever instead of green. But when I deleted them and retyped them or started out with the hashtag or whatever, it's working fine now. And yeah, a lot of people have already told me how to do it, especially with command and / or just hashtag or sorry, pound.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, more than likely what's going on there is something inside of your VS code or your Windows is just having a little bit of trouble with reading the text, analyzing what's going on, then updating. But as long as you follow the correct syntax, when you go to execute the script, it will execute correctly and ignore it.
Gotcha. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so it looks like that's it for X-ray questions. So let's go ahead and continue on with our lecture. So now we talked about our numbers. We've talked about our string. The next thing to talk about will be our Booleans. All right, so let's go ahead and run a couple of print statements here for our Booleans. Again, Booleans are true or false. So I can say print type, and then here I can do true. You'll see that the only difference between Python and JavaScript when it comes to Boolean types is the capital letter at the beginning, right? True is the same thing. It just has a capital letter. And when executed, they both come back to class Boolean. Now, where there's a difference is in truthy and falsy statements. So let's cover that real quick. All right. Let's So let's go into truthy and falsy. All right, let's go ahead and print my Boolean type of an empty string. When I execute this, I get false. Again, it's an empty string, right? Just like we saw in JavaScript yesterday, an empty string that doesn't actually occupy space comes back as false. When I execute it with some content, it comes back as true. All right, well, what about 0? 0 still comes back as false, and anything other than 0 will still come back as true. So far there we have some commonalities, all right? But what happens if I have an empty list? Well, if I have an empty list, it continues to come back false, but if you run this in JavaScript, you'll see that an empty array will actually come back true. And same thing for an object. When I run this in Python, it comes back false, while in JavaScript, an empty object will come back true. And just to confirm that what I'm saying is correct, let's go ahead and try it out in our node console. I'm going to go ahead and console.log, and I think it's Boolean. Yep, perfect. And I'm going to pass an empty object there. So there you go. We can see that if I pass an empty object into my JavaScript code, it will come back as true. But in Python, when I pass in an empty object, it comes back as false. Now, without going too much into the weeds of it, is because of the way that Python and JavaScript handle this specific data type. When you go to create things like arrays and objects, it already allocates some memory space and some other under the hood functions to ensure that that specific data type can work correctly in JavaScript. So because it's occupying that space, when you evaluate it, it comes back as true. While in Python, that's not the case. In Python, if it's empty, it doesn't allocate that information to that specific data type, so it still comes back as false. All right, so that's going to be covering our truthy and falsy. Does anyone have any questions over truthy and falsy statements?
Yo, so it is totally opposite than the JavaScript, right?
Only with complex data structures like objects and arrays, right? In this case, I'm messing with a dictionary and a list, while in JavaScript, I'm messing with objects and arrays.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Of course. All right. If there aren't any other questions, I'm going to go past our Booleans and truthy and falsy statements here and go ahead and move forward into our more complex types. And actually, before we move forward into our more complex types, let's go a little bit into creating variables and talking about some comparison and conditional flow. So again, if I want to create a variable, well, in Python, in JavaScript, I had to utilize either let or var, or I had to also utilize const, right? And actually, I'm just going to remove var altogether because we don't even want to think about that. We're not going to use it. It's not common practice anymore. It's old, right? So we have let and const to actually establish a variable. Now, JavaScript will still let you establish a variable without it. Some frameworks will enforce it. If you're in TypeScript, which is the next step after JavaScript, TypeScript will 100% enforce it. If you don't have let or const or something to specify this is going to be a variable, along with the specific data type, the language is not going to let you even try to run the script. So that's good for JavaScript. But what's the difference between JavaScript and Python? I'm in a different language. How does my language know that I'm assigning a variable? Well, the language knows that I'm assigning a variable not because of what's happening on the left-hand side or what's happening here. It knows that I'm assigning a variable because of my equal sign. So the moment I place down an equal sign, Python says, okay, well, there's an equal sign here. Whatever's on the left side is a variable, and whatever's on the right is going to be the value of said variable. I'm a, oh, hello. And that's why you utilize double quotes. I'm a variable. Now, just to point out, yesterday when I was typing something like my variable, I used to type it like this. Oh, hello. There you go. My var. This is called camel casing, where every new word is identified by a capital letter. So if I wanted to type my name, I would start off with lowercase and then go to capital letters, right? Well, in Python, we utilize snake casing. And snake casing is where words are separated by an underscore. So again, if I wanted to write snake casing or my name, it would look as such. Snake casing and Francisco Avio. Right, so there's a little bit of our naming conventions. If you utilize numbers, you can't start off, you can't just leave a variable with a number, and I'm pretty sure you can't start it off with a number as well. If I do something like this, it's going to say, hey, you can't do that. You're trying to put a number 1 here in front, you can start a variable with a number. You can end it with a number, but you cannot start it with a number. Try to avoid capital letters inside of your variable naming conventions until we get to OP. Capital letters are put aside specifically to ensure that you can easily identify a class or the instance of a class. All right. Does anyone have any questions as far as naming conventions go for Python?
Not naming, but the variable. We don't put before it constant or let.
Exactly, right. We don't
We
put
we don't declare it.
right. You don't need to put const or let. You're still declaring it, but you're declaring it by the equal sign. The moment I put equals, it says, well, I'm getting this value here on my left-hand side. It hasn't been established before, so this has to be a new variable. And then it
So
assigns value to it.
This will not make problem like if we have variable we don't want to touch it, we want to be constant. Is there any way to save the variable from the change?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if I wanted a variable to be constant, in JavaScript, we had that ability where I wanted to keep the integrity of a type. Well, in Python, I don't have that ability. In Python, I cannot keep something as a constant. We'll learn later in OOP how we can privatize specific attributes, but we don't have the constant functionality. Is that
Thank you.
word?
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. All right. Taking a pause here, and I'm going to go ahead and take a look at X-ray questions and see what we have. All right. Mickey, I'm going to go ahead and let somebody else help you with that question just for the interest of time. And I see Connor added something there on the chat, but it doesn't seem like there are any questions. So now that I have my variable, everything works exactly the same. I can still print my variable, and all I'm doing here is opening up a box and grabbing the value and printing it onto my console. All right. Easy peasy, right? So let's move on into some conditional statements at this point. Now, in conditional statements, just like in Python, we have our else if and else if, right? But they work a little bit differently. So I'm actually going to bring back my variable just so I can utilize it here. So I can say if my variable, and let's say I want to grab the length of my variable. So I can say if the length of my variable is greater than 6. Rather than doing curly brackets and indenting it, what I'm going to do is place a colon. Now, after this colon, when I press enter, you'll notice that my VS Code is already indenting my cursor for me. So in JavaScript, blocks of code are identified by curly brackets. in Python, blocks of code are identified by indentation. So it's really important that you maintain the same indentation throughout your entire script. If you want to get some sort of extension to manage your indentation, you can, but just make sure it stays consistent throughout your entire Python code. All right, so there we go. I have if my variable length is greater than 6, maybe I can print var length longer than 6. And just like before, I can also write an else statement. And my else statement could just be print. This is default statement. There you go. Well, now when I execute this code here, we can see that my conditional flow gets triggered. I evaluate if the length of the variable is greater than 6, which in this case it is, right? I have more than 6 characters here. And it prints onto my terminal var length longer than 6. Else, it prints onto my terminal, this is default. So if I were to change this to less than 6 and execute my code, we can see this is default statement. All right. Finally, we have our else if. Well, in JavaScript, you write it quite literally with else if. In Python, you write it with elif. And here we can say, if my var is greater than 6 and my var is less than 10. All right, so there I'm passing another conditional. I can say print, this is from else if. So let's execute our code. We can see that the default statement is still being triggered. So let's see, the length of my var is definitely greater than 6, but it must not be less than 10. So let's try to make this number a little bit smaller there. All right, I guess even more solid. So I guess the character should be a count of 6 then. Let me just do this. Rather than playing the guessing game. Okay, so we see that it's 14. There you go. I was going the wrong direction yet again. All right, so there you go. So if my var is greater than 6 and my var is less than 15, then it will print my else statement, my else if statement. And now we see this is from else if. All right. We covered quite a bit here. We went over how to run conditional operators such as greater than or less than. Same thing stands as in JavaScript. We have our greater than or equal to. And we'll talk about our equal sign comparison here shortly. But here I also threw in the and statement. Yesterday, there seemed to be a bit of confusion over what and or actually do. So or will trigger this statement if either condition on the left or right-hand side are true. While and is only triggered if both conditions are true. And here's a pretty good example of that, right? So this is or. Here on the right-hand side, we see or again. But there in the middle in green is where our and statement is living. All right. Does anyone have any questions about what we've covered in regards to Python syntax and conditional flow at this time?
Can you please, when you get chance, you said there is tool to manage the indentation while we are using the Python. Can you put any reference or link for this in the chat, please?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I'll go ahead and share that here when we go on the break.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a general question. So do we ever use, so when we have or get a programming job, they do they start out as, what is the best language, I guess, to master? Because I guess JavaScript and Python like are so similar. It's easy to use, put JavaScript code into Python and stuff like that. Which one should we focus on?
Can I offer an answer here? If you're cooking a meal, like what's the best ingredient for your soup? If you're building a house, what's the best tool to do the job? There's so many things out there and new tools being created. It really is about learning the tool, becoming very like
Familiar.
skilled in it and applying it, and then just like getting the reps in. And then, you know, if you really want to know how the what is, go to the documentation and keep digging in, because you can go all the way down on there. Python and JavaScript are, I think, both built on C, and then go down that rabbit hole right there, right? There's just a lot of stuff in there.
Can I add something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Chris, like each country has its own kitchen, okay? Like the Indian food, like the Mexican food, like the Mediterranean food, okay? So it's the same. Each company needs its own language machine, okay? Sorry, language, developing language, because they use this for their application or for their website. But in general, and what I read last night or yesterday, the JavaScript, one of the most popular language because different reasons, okay? Like it is the popularity and demand. It's always up to date. It has feature is not in the other language, like the interacting with, you know what I mean? So if you want to know which one the most popular, I think the JavaScript. But what you need to learn, it depends. Where are you going? Okay, each company, each place has his own or the need or for different language.
Okay, gotcha. All right, that makes sense. Thank you.
Awesome. So without being dead horse, there's really not a right programming language to learn or which one to go after. You'll find out that pretty much all the programming languages work similarly. Each one of them is better at doing one thing than another language might be. And some of them are just more angry all the time than others are. So, you know, as you get progress in your career, you'll figure out which one of those languages is the one that you want to be most proficient at, and it definitely depends on what it is that you like to do. If you like building servers and building API calls, then you might end up working with Rust or Ruby. If you like building front-end applications and really interacting with user interface, then TypeScript might be the next thing that you tackle. It's all just up in the air as far as where you decide to take your career path. This is to give you the baseline so that you can learn the skills and then take off in the direction that you would like. Does that answer your question, Chris?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Awesome. So we've been going on for quite a bit. It's already 10 o'clock. So let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and continue on with our lecture. Thank you so much, everyone. This off. All right. We just finished talking about conditional rendering, or just how to establish conditionals inside of our Python scripts. But let's talk a little bit about our ternary statements, right? Yesterday, we were able to do these if and else statements utilizing JavaScript. So there's got to be, in one line, utilizing JavaScript. And it looks something like this, right? I had something like let my var. I apologize. Let me go back to my other page here so that's not distracting. So I can say let my var be equal to, and then I had some sort of conditional here where I could say if, let's say if 10 was greater than 15, this is just an example, then I would set it to greater. Otherwise I would set it to Oh, hello, I can't type. Less than. Right, and this is the way that ternary statements work in JavaScript. It's just a simplified way of writing conditionals. But how could I do that whenever I'm writing something in Python? Well, it's going to look pretty much the same. I'm going to say my variable, and I'm going to say cap. And what I'm going to ask is, well, these work a little bit differently. All right, we're going to put our else statement here and an else statement right next to it. So the first argument that's going to be passed, it's not going to be what's being questioned or what's being actually evaluated. It's going to be what our result will become if it is true. So I'm just going to go ahead and make my var dot upper, which will make my string all uppercase. If my var, and let's do the length of my var, is greater than 6, else I'm going to ensure that my var is in title format. All right, so that's all working. Let's go ahead and print my var cap to see what our result becomes. Well, we can see that I went ahead and printed my var cap. Here is my var. It is I am a variable, which is longer than 6, right? So my evaluation happened. It came back to be true. And since it was true, the left side of my argument is what was executed. So my var cap was equal to my var in uppercase letters. Now, if I were to change this to 25, I would only get my string back in title format. We can see that it's no longer all in uppercase letters. Instead, it's in title format. All right. Does anyone have any questions regarding ternary statements?
Yeah, one more time, please.
Go ahead, Muir.
One more time, please.
One more time, just like as a review or a different example?
Yeah, review.
Yeah. So we have my var here, which was a original variable with some string inside of it. I made a new variable called my var cap. And what I'm trying to set that to is either my var in all uppercase letters, or this string in all uppercase letters, or this string in title format. I have an if and else statement, meaning I am handling for this situation to have two outcomes, true or false. And what's being evaluated is the statement in between if and else. So I'm asking if the length of my string is greater than 25. Because it is not, it is executing my else statement on the right-hand side and returning my variable or my variable cap in a title format. Whereas if I turn this into 3, this statement would come back true, and it will return my entire variable here on the left-hand side as an uppercase. All right.
Can you please break it down under like in the normal or the usual if else statement so I can compare it?
Definitely.
Please. Thank you.
Let's say I have my var cap and I make that equal to an empty string for now. Or even better, to make it equal to none. We'll go over none here shortly. And let's say I do if, again, my if statement is only covering if len of my var is greater than 3, then I want my var cap to be equal to my var dot upper. Else, I want my var cap to be equal to my var dot title. Oh. So that's the equivalent here of what's happening. These, I think it's 5. Yeah, these 5 lines of code here are equivalent to what's going on in line 51. Does that help, Murid?
Yeah, I just feel like we took it from the back to the end, right? When we make it the eternity shape, right?
Yeah, we kind of switch some things around, right? Our evaluation is now in the middle rather than at the very beginning. And my true statement goes on the left side. My false statement goes on the right side. Daniel?
Yeah, thank you.
Of course.
Yeah, my question is that is there a reason why we would prefer ternary statements? Is it just, or is this just an alternative way of writing the conditional statements? Is there like a time complexity?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's actually not a time complexity option here or interaction here. Code is evaluated, or the size of code is evaluated by lines of code being occupied. It's called LOC, right? It stands for lines of code. So if you have an opportunity to make something shorthand or make it shorter, you definitely should, right? Just to try to keep your project smaller. With that said, you need to make the decision yourself of what you're sacrificing for that shorthand, right? Is my code still readable if I apply shorthand? If my code becomes unreadable just by writing shorthand, then I shouldn't do shorthand. I should just write it all out. That way people can actually read my code and understand what's happening. So it's a decision basis on the independent developer, but code readability will always take priority. Does that answer your question, Daniel?
It does. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Why you start with my var cap equal none before the if statement?
Are you talking about right up here?
Yeah, the first line.
Yeah, so that's because in the context of, oh, sorry.
And where is it in the eternity line? The eternity form.
I didn't understand that second portion. Could you ask it?
Okay, yeah. Why you start with before the if else statement with my var cap equal none?
Yeah. So let me go ahead and answer that question. The first one is going to be, why did I start this variable before going into the if and else statement? Well,
Yeah.
I'm trying to avoid a scoping issue. I'm making sure that my var cap exists before I even go into my if and else statements. And then I'm just changing the values of that variable. Currently, this variable exists. It's just set to nothing, right? Which is none. And then I'm just changing its content. Well, down below, I don't need to do something like starting it out so that it exists already and it's in nothing. Instead, I have it down here in my ternary statement. I don't have to do this whole equals none or say, hey, this exists already. So when you run this, don't worry about it. I could just initialize the variable to the return of my conditional statement on the right-hand side. Does that answer your question, Muran?
That's answer my question too. Yani, you are very good. You are amazing. Thank you.
Of course, no problem. All right, I see a question on the chat here from Brandon. It says, does Python have hoist capabilities? All right, we're gonna get into that once we get into functions. If you're referencing hoisting for just variable specific, it becomes really confusing with Python. So I'm going to keep our hoisting topic to only functions. And I will answer that once I get to functions. All right. So we just covered our conditionals, we covered ternary statements, and we talked a little bit about none. Well, yesterday it got a little confusing between none and undefined, right? So undefined means a variable exists, but it has nothing, doesn't know its meaning to life, right? Its meaning of life has been undefined. While the other one, when I established it as null, it had a meaning in life. And it was aware that its meaning in life was to do absolutely nothing, right? It was only supposed to exist and eventually die or receive a greater purpose. Well, in Python, there's no confusion. If you start a variable, it's going to be set to none for you. There's not going to be an undefined capability in Python. All right, so it's every single variable has a purpose to life. It's just none. All right. So now we've covered quite a bit of information.
Can you say that last thing one more time? every function has a meaning in life. It's just none. Is that what you just said?
Every variable will have a meaning, right? Even if I started as empty, it will just be none.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Of course. All right. So now that we've covered all this information, let's go into a little bit of manipulation with our string before we start moving into our list and dictionaries and all the more complex data types. Where's my string here? I'm gonna go ahead and copy this, bring it down below so that we have it available. And let's do a little bit of string work here. I'm gonna work with my variable, and now I'm gonna go ahead and try to slice this variable. Well, you'll notice, and I'm not sure if I think there was an update to JavaScript as of last cohort where you could actually use negative numbers to mark an index. But I know in Python that is an option. So in Python, if I wanted to grab the very first couple of numbers, I can do something called slicing for this very specific string here, right? So if I wanted to grab I'm, I could go from 0, 1, 2, and ensure that it gets cut off at 3. So now here's a very, very important thing to remember. Typically, when it comes to slicing, the first argument is inclusive, meaning it will be included in the result. And the second argument is excluded, meaning it will not be, or inclusive, meaning it will not be in the result, right? So let's take a look at that. Again, I want to go from 0, 1, and 2. If I go from 0 to 2, and I run my script, you'll see that all I get is I and my apostrophe. Well, that is 0 and 1. Again, the second argument is excluded or exclusive. So I need to make sure that if I put 2, it stops at 2 and says, oh, well, I don't need this. I'm going to dump it, right? Or it never even touches that index 2. It just stops there. So if I make it 3, then it'll actually give me the index of 0, 1, and 2 to get the complete version of the first word. All right. And I see Erica is already sharing some things on the chat as far as other things that you can utilize with this slicing. So let's go ahead and get into that. So I can change this first variable here. I can definitely turn this into a 1, or maybe I want something where I want A, right? So A is at index 4, and I know it's exclusive for my second argument, so I have to pass in 6, and there we get A. All right, everything's working great. I'm able to grab just that one character. But what if I wanted the entire string up to 6? I could tell it to do 0, but this slicing method here has a really cool functionality where if I don't pass in an argument, it's going to assume that I want to go from the very start. And it does the same thing vice versa. If I only pass in the first argument and I don't pass in a secondary, it's going to assume that I want to go to the very end. All right, so there we can see it starts with index 6, which is a V, and then goes all the way to the very end of the string. The last thing to demonstrate here is going to be our -1, and I'm sorry, second to last thing here is going to be the -1, or negative numbers. If I wanted to get, let's say, all of this string, or if I just wanted to get variable back, I can say that I want to start -6. Or, sorry, that's going to be -5. Oh, it was -6. That was close. And that's, wow, it was -7. It is not even -7. It's, instead of guessing, let's go ahead and count it. So here's -1, -2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So it's going to be all the way back from -8. So when you pass in a negative argument, it starts from the end of the string and starts walking itself forward. Now, something important to remember. If you're starting from the beginning of the string, it starts at 0. So from start is 0. But if you're starting at the end of the string, or let's see, from end, it starts with -1. All right. And that's going to be your negative numbers and how we can utilize that. And I see that Erica has something here that's really useful, and that's for reversing string. You'll likely run into a problem or some sort of interview question that asks you to reverse string. And let's take a look at what that actually does here. So we're doing this 2 colons and passing in the -1. And when I run this, we can see that all that did was reverse my string. There's quite a bit of extra functionality as to what's actually going on here in the syntax. We're not going to get into it as of right now. It is not part of today's lecture, but know that this is the easiest way that you can reverse a string. All right, at this point, does anyone have any questions regarding slicing? Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, so strings are still immutable, right? My var would still be the same.
Yeah, that's a great question. We haven't talked about mutability or immutability, or if they are mutable or immutable. So let's go ahead and break that down real quick. So I'm a variable. If I were to say my var is equal to hello, and then print my var, we're going to see that the value of my var changed. Does that mean that string is mutable?
No, you're just reassigning it.
Right. I'm not actually mutating the string. The data type is still the same, right? I'm actually just reassigning that variable. So let's try to do some mutation to the string. I'm going to go ahead and grab the very first index for simplicity's sake and turn that uppercase letter into a lowercase letter. And then run it. Well, yesterday when we were working with JavaScript, this would have worked, and it would have just executed the code, but ignored my attempt to mutate my string. Well, in Python knows that the string is an immutable data type, meaning I cannot mutate it. It doesn't change. And when I try to do so, I try to mutate it, it tells me, hey, sorry, but we don't do that. And not only do we not do that, I am going to let you know that this is unacceptable. Like, you can't do that here. And it gives me an error. Does that answer your question, Daniel?
It does, thank you.
Of course. And yes, Python is way, way less, a lot less of a Wild West than JavaScript. All right.
One issue I ran into when assigning variables, it's so easy to reassign the value of a variable that sometimes you lose track and then you reassign the on a lower line and you forgot, and you mess up the next part of your code because of that.
Yeah, that definitely happens more often than what I would like to admit. All right. So now that we have all this information done, strings are pretty much over at this point. I don't see any questions on the X-Ray questions channel. So I'm going to go ahead and move on into our list and tuples. So list and tuples. Rather than redrawing this, I'm just going to go ahead and grab what we have from yesterday. Just like we saw with strings were still iterable. I was able to access individual slots within the string utilizing indexes. Well, list and arrays work pretty much exactly the same. They have different naming conventions for their functionalities. For example, push is append in Python, but they do the same thing, right? Push will add something to the end of the data type, while append will add something to the end of the data type. So if I were to start a list, So let's say I don't know, let's go with staff here. And I run my list. And my staff has, let's see, Francisco. It has Adam. And then it has, maybe it has another nested list or an object, but we haven't gone over the object yet. And let's say that in this list that's nested, we have students. So just going off, let's see, we have Brandon. I know we have two Brandons. So to ensure that you guys don't feel excluded, I'm gonna go with two Brandons in there. All right. Then we have maybe Tim. We have Murad. We have Erica. And then maybe we have another nested list in there. And in this nested list, we have some of our TAs. So we have Rachel, Connor, and I apologize if I misspell anyone's name. We have Aiden. We have Rich. And I'm going to stop the arrays here, right? So now we can see our staff. It looks into, oh, I said arrays, I apologize. We can stop our list here. So now we can see our staff list. It has a couple of different indexes. Although it has some nested list, the staff list only has 4 indexes. If I wanted to access something else within one of these nested lists, I can, and I can do that utilizing indexing as well. So let's get into that. We went over how to traverse through an array yesterday, and it's very much the same as to how to do so in Python. So can somebody walk me through how I would grab Tim out of my list of staff?
Yeah, can I try?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, we're gonna make staff,
All right.
right? Between 2 brackets. You wanna, which one you want? Tim?
Tim, yes.
Okay, so 0, 1, 2, and then another, yeah, bracket, and then 0, 1, 2. That's it. That's how we access Tim.
All right, let's check it out. So we execute our code here, and we get Tim back in our terminal. So just like we heard Murad counting out loud, he was going through each individual index. This is index 0, index 1. He accessed index 2. So now I was working with this list here. He worked through these indexes of index 0, index 1, and then grabbed index 2 to get back 10. All right. Does anyone have any questions regarding list? Just like yesterday, lists are mutable. I can change the contents of list, right? If I wanted to rather than be in a list, I just wanted it to be something that says students, I could say staff 2 is equal to students. And when I run my list here, we can see that all I get back is students. If I were to take a look at the entire list, we would only see one nested list. We would see Francisco and Adam, students, with our one nested list. So the list itself is mutable. Does anyone have any questions regarding lists?
Yeah, yesterday when you talk about the spread operator with the array, it does work with the also in Python with the list here?
No.
So I mean, no, not so there is different operators?
Yes, we do not have spread operators here in Python.
Okay, I'm just, yeah, curious. Thank you.
All right. So now I can see there's a little bit of a conversation here on the chat regarding tuples and list. So let's go ahead and talk about tuples and list. This is going to be better explained with a drawing here. Oh. All right, so tuples and lists are very similar to one another as far as their representation, right? I can access both of them through indexes, and they look pretty much almost exactly the same. Now, here's where the differences come in. A list is a mutable data type, meaning I could change it. It is not solid. right? I could add elements into it. I can append new things. I can remove things. I can do variable reassignment to change the specific information. And the majority of its slots, or most of its slots, will also have mutability in it, unless dictated otherwise. Well, what about tuples? Tuples do not work that way. If I want to add something to a tuple, I would have to create an entirely new tuple and utilize variable reassignment to assign it to the correct slot. Now, with that said, what would be a use case for each one of these? All right. Well, let's say I'm writing a program that has a list of the days of the week. I know the days of the week are never going to change, or at least I hope they never change. If they do, then something went terribly wrong. So I know that I'm always going to have from Monday through Sunday. So if I'm writing a program that has to account for that, well, then I'll just use a tuple. I'm never going to change that. I may change its presentation utilizing some sort of string method to change the way that it's being represented, but it doesn't actually change the data type of the tuple. Well, a list can grow, it can get smaller, it can occupy more spaces, it can occupy less spaces, its content can change, and so on. So that's the surface level of the difference between a list of a tuple for us as far as functionality. But what about under the hood? What's the difference there? Well, think about a list. In order to be mutable, how much functions and different methods have to be added into a list in order to have the functionality that it does, right? Because all of these dot append methods and remove, excuse me, or finding the index of something, they're provided to us, but they're not magical methods. They're not these things that just come with the language and okay, awesome. They don't occupy any space as far as memory. They definitely occupy space. They occupy a lot of memories. Not a lot of memory spaces, excuse me. They occupy memory space, and they do that to ensure that you have the capabilities to mutate a list and change its ability to hold different content. Well, a tuple, a tuple, since it's something that's solid and it's never going to change, doesn't come with all those built-in methods. So it actually occupies a lot of less space when it comes to memory. So that's the main difference between lists and tuples. If you're ever sitting inside of an interview question and they ask you the difference between them, make sure you talk about the difference in memory space and not just its mutability differences. We'll cover how to write a tuple here shortly, but does anyone have any questions over this so far?
Yes, sir. When you were talking about the list, you said the list is mutable unless dictated and otherwise, right? What do you mean by what did you mean? Did you mean there is some way, sort or some way you can make the list act like tuple? That's what did you mean?
So when I was talking about that portion, I'm not talking about the list itself. The list itself will be mutable, but its contents may or may not be mutable. A perfect example of that would be here, right? I have a string within my list. The list is a mutable data type, but my string is not.
Is immutable.
Does that make sense?
That's what did you meant by the it's unless dictated and other okay.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that's it.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
I see you.
And one more thing, you said something about the memory. You said the list take more memory because it has a lot of function. That's what did you mean?
Yes, lists take more because of the functionality that comes built in with it.
Is there any other difference than the memory and the mutability?
There's a couple.
That's what I need to know right now.
There's a couple of other things under the hood, but this is what we need to cover as of right now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Connor, would you like to add something?
Yeah, actually, so in the chat, I was saying that the list starts off with a default size of 100, and then it doubles in size every time you go over that limit. Is that default size like accurate? My memory might be faulty.
Sorry, I'm coughing like crazy. I'm not 100% sure. I'll have to look into that, and then we could probably get back to everybody.
Wait, one other thing, Francisco. Python actually does have a spread operator. You use the
Asterisk.
the star asterisk for a list, and it's double stars for a dictionary, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, we're gonna be covering these things later on in OOP. They don't work exactly the same as the spread operator. They're similar,
Okay.
but they don't work the same. All right. So let's go ahead and continue on with our lecture here. We're currently just finishing up our list, and oh, we got to go into tuples before I skip that. So creating a tuple is very similar. I can say days of the week. And when I go to create these days of the week, I'm just going to create them within parentheses. All right, again, I can have Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. I'm not going to go through all of them. Let's go ahead and print this information here. Let's print days of the week. When I go to print it, we can see that it comes out in those parentheses. And if I run the type function there and I execute it, it's going to tell me that it's a tuple. Now, let's try to change something within this tuple. All right, let's say that I want days of the week index 0. And I'm actually going to go ahead and print days of the week index 0 as well. And I'm going to try to change index 0 to be Sunday. All right, maybe I want my days of the week to start from Sunday rather than Monday. Well, you can see that, again, Python, it's a little bit more strict than JavaScript. It's not just going to ignore that I'm trying to change an immutable data type. It's going to tell me, hey, this is a tuple object, and it does not support assignment. Right? I can still access specific things, but it does not support the assignment.
When you say assignment, are you able to add to tuples, or do they have to be defined explicitly prior to referencing them?
Yeah, so that's a great question. If I wanted to add to a tuple, I can't actually add to the same exact data type, right? There's not going to be any sort of append or anything like that. What I can do is I can add a specific element to a tuple, and I believe that's just with the plus sign and then a separate tuple. I may be a little bit rusty here, but let's try it out. Let's say we want to print days of the week. We're going to go plus, and this should be Sunday and Saturday. All right, this will return the return statement of this operation. So now this printed, and it looks like it was able to add more indexes to my days of the week, right? But if I were to print days of the week down below, we can see that that's not the case. Days of the week as Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. What I'm doing here on line 68 is I'm actually creating an entirely new tuple. I'm not mutating the original data type.
Gotcha. Okay.
All right. Awesome.
So we have to give it a new name, right? We have to assign new name for this new one, right?
Yeah, if you wanted to have it again, you could do variable reassignment and dump the first one if you really wanted to. But it's very important that we emphasize that I'm not mutating the original tuple. I'm just doing variable reassignment and dump.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
All right, I see a couple of things going on in the chat. Listen tuple, I know that definitely is. All right. So now that we've covered all this information regarding lists and tuples, we can move on to dictionaries before going on into our break. So dictionaries work very similarly to objects. They grant us direct access. So just like before, when we talked about it, when I moved through a list, a tuple, or any sort of iterative data structure, I'm starting from left to right or from right to left. But I have to iterate through the structure. I'm not just accessing one thing. Well, that's not the way that objects work, all right? So objects are like storage units or storage containers where everything is on the same level. They're not next to one another. They're not, we're going to see that in Python, you can iterate through it pretty simple or pretty easily. But you do not have to start from left to right or right to left to be able to access them. Right here, we're going to go ahead and put dictionary. All I have to do is bring the correct key to open up an individual box. I have direct access to all of them. They're all within the same level. I don't have to move through some sort of stack. Think of it like a stack of pancakes, right? So we see that in a stack of pancakes, I have, from the very, I have to start from one end or the other, right? I can either start from the bottom up or I can start from the top down. But with a dictionary is not a stack of any sort. You could just access an individual item right away as long as you have the correct key. So let's get building some dictionaries. Let's go ahead and...
Can you please repeat this again one more time? I'm sorry.
Yeah, of course. Do you mean the the direct access portion? I think you said yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so list, tuples, or any sort of iterative data structure like strings, you have to start from one end or the other of the data type. And you have to iterate through it, right? To grab some index, grab some value.
You mean it has order, right? It's ordered?
Yeah, and it comes in a order of left to right, dictated by...
Okay.
Right? Even if you utilize the dot index of function, under the hood, the dot index of function is still going through it. Like it's still starting from left to right, finding it, and then returning what it is that you're looking for. It's just doing it more efficiently for you, because it's working with some of the inner guts of what Python is built with, right? But our dictionary is completely different because I don't have to start from any direction. As long as I tell it exactly what it is that I want to grab, it's immediately there at the top of the stack, right? Rather than thinking about a stack of pancakes, think about a plate of different food items. I could eat any of the food items. They're all next to each other. They're not stacked or piled up on top of each other. I can just grab my fork and dig right in.
Just like the set, right? There is another kind called sets. Did the same thing, disordered. I mean, it's no order.
So a set isn't ordered, but we'll be covering sets here shortly.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. All right. So now let's talk about staff one more time. And actually, rather than staff, let's just go ahead and build Francisco. All right, so let's say my name for Francisco here. Again, this is Python, so I have to make sure it's in quotation marks. Let's do age. I guess today I'll be 13. And let's do profession. Anybody have a funny one that I could put here?
Dog groomer.
Oh, I was gonna say
Oh, professional dad. There we go.
oh, dad is good.
That works too. Yeah, I'm gonna put that one instead. There you go.
Yeah.
All right. So there it is. I have my object. And just like I said, if I go ahead and print my object itself, I can print Francisco, I will see the entire representation of my object. Well, this is a key. It directs me direct access to all of its values. It's a key and value pair data structure. I can grab profession just by specifying, hey, I want Francisco. And yesterday, I don't think I covered this yesterday for JavaScript. But in JavaScript, we can utilize something called dot notation to access specific properties. No, that's all we did yesterday was dot notation, right? All right, so in Python, I can't utilize dot notation to access specific properties of a dictionary. So I can't do dot age and expect this to work because it's not going to be able to recognize it. It's going to think that I'm trying to use some sort of attribute or method that belongs to the dictionary class. So here we can see I have an attribute error. The dictionary does not have age. All right, well, I want to grab the key of age. So instead, I'm going to utilize square brackets. And there we can see it's already giving me some suggestions. And in quotation marks, I'll place age. If I run my script one more time, I can get that the age is 13. All right. I can also iterate here. Maybe I have something like pets. Well, I can have nested structures. I have a list now of different pets. And maybe my different pets are, I have a type. This one's a dog. Name. Polo. And then I have another one. Type. Also dog. And name. This one is Zeus. All right. Where are you crying? So just like before, we can see everything is separated by commas, and I could have other data types nested in within my object. It doesn't have to be a relationship between string and the object. It doesn't have to be restricted to any sort of values such as integers or floats. I can have list, sets, dictionaries. The whole shabam bam can fall inside of an object. And I would just iterate through it. So, oh, I see.
What about the key? It's also any kind of data, like we can make the key integer or anything else?
That's a great question, right? So what about the key? My key, I'm putting it in quotation marks there on the left-hand side. So what happens if I try to give my key a number? Well, if I try to give my key a number, it seems to work. All right, so let's try this out. Let's say I want to enter Francisco at key of 1.
1.
Well, it works. It returns Francisco. So even though this works, this is not going to be useful for you, and it is not common practice. It's going to work, and it is usable, but please try to avoid this at all times. Ensure that your keys are descriptive of what the value is holding.
I'm just asking because yesterday you gave us example, okay? And this example was for object, and the object was a database object, and all the keys of the object was number. Do you remember? That's why I'm asking, yeah, if we can do this the same with the
Numbered? Are you talking about like
yeah, in the curriculum? No, in the curriculum there is example, okay, for object with has name database, the one that you iterate over it using the for loop, if you remember.
Okay, got it.
So that would be like the ID number as the key?
Exactly, yeah,
Okay.
Yeah. Well,
would you still want to make it a string or just keep it an integer? Like the ID number being a string?
I guess that depends on what it is that you want your program to do, right? You could keep it within an integer, but it's definitely going to depend on what it is that you want your functionality of your program to be. And yeah, if I wanted to mimic a database and have specific IDs, right, in it for a data type, that would be a good use to utilize integers. Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Of course. So now we have this specific, this one dictionary here. Can somebody walk me through pulling Zeus out of this dictionary that falls in Francisco?
I think it's gonna be the same way like the nested array, right?
Yeah, let's try it out.
Okay, so Francisco, which one do you want to go to?
Zeus.
The Zeus. Okay, so gonna be Francesco. The two brackets, and I can't see.
Yes, I apologize. Go ahead.
Okay, can you scroll it down? Let me see. Yeah, to count. Okay, so Francesco, two brackets. Yeah, 0, 1. That's pet 2. So 2, and then another curly bracket. 0, 1, and then another curly. Yeah, another bracket. 1. I think 1.
Okay. Yeah, so let's try that out. Let's see what it does. All right, so it seems
Oh.
like you get a couple of errors. All right. And this was definitely good. We're trying to iterate through a dictionary,
Sorry.
but it's not a list, right? Instead I have
Oh,
to
so
keys. Go ahead, Murat.
no, I was thinking it's the same like the list, but it seems like the dictionary has different.
Right. All right, Erjan, go ahead.
Erica already answered it in the comment.
All right. We wanted Zeus, but let's see what we get here. All right, so we're saying we want to grab pets. All right, and then after pets, we want name. Okay, and then after name, we want index 0. Oh, but because it's Zeus, we want index 1. Let's see what this one does. This one turned in an error as well. All right. So let's try to cut it down. Let's see what we're working with here. So we know we want to work with pets. And when I run this, what is it that I'm getting back here?
List.
Yeah, I'm getting back a list. All right, so I see that it's out of order. Swap 0 and name on the chat there. Okay, so since it's a list, the next thing I want to do is grab by index, which is 1. That's going to give me the correct dictionary.
So yeah, then we can put the name.
Exactly. So now I can
Yeah.
go.
Okay, you got it. Yeah, that's a good one. Okay,
Now,
it's easy also. Yeah. Thank.
of course. All right. And that is iterating through a dictionary. Now, a dictionary works just as well as an object. It's, as far as reassignment goes, pretty much utilizes the same functionality here. So I can say Francisco, square brackets, I guess status.
The key. Yeah.
That, and let's make this alive. All right. And now we run Francisco here. We can see that there is a new key at the very end named status, and it says alive. All right. So I added a new key, named it status. It says alive. Oh, go ahead, Brendan.
How could I open up a Python file without necessarily executing it? So you know how you said like you could do like a JavaScript playground or a Python playground? Is it possible to do the same thing but have all of your variables and functions already available to you? So instead of like executing it strictly, you would just open the file to have everything available?
Got it. Yeah, that's a great question. And we can definitely cover that here in a split second. Just give me
Okay.
we'll cover that during a break here.
Okay.
All right. So now that I have this information, I have my new entry. How could I delete this new entry? All right. Well, yesterday we did delete. Today we're going to do del for delete. We're going to do Francisco status and then print Francisco. All right, so in the first object, we'll see that there is a key for status that is added. That says that he is alive. Well, down below, I deleted that status, and now there's no status key, so I may be dead or may be alive. All right. Awesome. Before we knock into our break, I just remembered that we didn't cover the double equal sign inside of our comparison statements. So in
And the
Java,
set, you said you're gonna cover the set?
yes, we'll cover sets here shortly. Probably after our break. All right. So yesterday when we were learning JavaScript, we learned that we have strict and loosely comparisons. Our loosely was enforced by double equal sign, and our strictly was enforced by a triple equal sign. Well, my double equal sign works great as my triple equal sign worked great for what I needed. And we saw some unexpected behavior when I compared a string of 1, 2, 3 with double equals. And let me separate these lines here. 1, 2, 3. They weren't the same data type, all right? This was a string of 1, 2, 3. Its contents were the same, but the types were different. But yet this still evaluated to come back true. Well, in Python, there's no confusion. In Python, we don't have the ability to run a loose comparison, which in my opinion, that's fantastic because we really do not need something like that. If we want to do a loose comparison, that should definitely be something that we ourselves handle as developers with some extra elbow grease. So instead, to utilize our double equal sign for comparison, I can say, hey, is 1, 2, 3, and let me go ahead and print this. And say, hey, is 1, 2, 3 equal to 1, 2, 3? And when I run this, we'll see that this comes back false. And that's because this is a string and this is a number. If I make them both numbers or both string and then run the comparison, it will come back true. Now, not only does the type have to be the same, the content must also be the same. If I execute this code again, we can see that it still comes back false, and that's because the content is not the same. All right, we've covered quite a bit. It is now 11:05. Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break and come back at 11:15 to continue on with our lecture. Thank you so much, everyone. All right, welcome back, everyone. Before we left, we talked about dictionaries, and the last data type that we have to cover before moving into functions will be our sets. Well, what are sets, right? And why are they important? Well, sets, they're not very commonly used, and there was a conversation during our break about tuples and their commonality. It's true. Whenever you're working in web development, you're likely never gonna default to a tuple. They are useful. They are a useful data type for more when you're creating something that has to do with efficiency, or maybe you're developing some sort of tool that's going to interact with a larger portion of a framework. But they're not necessarily going to be useful when it comes to just us writing our code for server-side rendering and stuff like, or for servers, or most of the web development things that we'll be covering here in the program. Now, sets are kind of following the same track. It's very rare that you'll use them, but they're important as far as the ability to know what they do. So a set is very specific because it works kind of like a list, right? But it is mutatable. So it works like a list. You're still able to mutate it, but it's different than a list. But how is it different, right? Well, a set, one, is not ordered. Even though it's treated like a list, it is not going to be ordered. It's more of like a storage system. It's randomly dumping things in there. And every time I try to pass in something into a set, my set does a check inside of the current storage. And it says, well, does this item already exist in here? Because if this item already exists in here, I don't want another one. I'm only going to accept one of each individual item. I will not accept more than one. So I'm sure by now you all have seen a problem where it's like, iterate through the string and ensure that only return a list of letters, but make sure that there's no repetitive instances or something like that. And sure, you can go through the string and say, oh, well, if this letter is not in my current array, then add it into the array. But you would have to essentially iterate through two separate things, right? You would be iterating through the array and also iterating through the string that you're evaluating, which is inefficient. It's not the good way to solve that problem. Well, this is where sets would come in. So if I want to create a set, I could just do it like this. My set. All right, that's going to start an empty set. And maybe I can take this a step further. Let's go ahead and say empty set. If I don't want to start an empty set, let's say that I want to start a set with values. I can do it like this. Let's say 1, can hold S, I can hold 3 or 32. Sure. And so far, everything's going to work perfectly fine, all right? Let me go ahead and comment all of my other code out so that we're not distracted by it. Let's go ahead and print both of these sets. That's not what I meant to do here. Let me... So there we can see all of our the two sets that we've created. The first one, it's empty, so it's just showing us a set this way. And the second one seems to work kind of like a list. Each value is separated by a comma, but it's in curly brackets. And there's one other specific difference that I want people to notice. All right, what's weird about that print statement? If I'm looking at line 98 when I created my set, what's happening down here? Does anybody notice something weird?
Is it returning an object?
So it's returning an instance of a kind of like a dictionary, right? But it's not
A class?
The order is different.
There you go. The order. All right.
Oh,
I have 1S and 32 when I first created it. But down below in my print statement, it has 32, 1, and S. Well, I wonder what happens if I continue to add more things here. Let's say I want a couple of other numbers in there just to add some variety. Well, now you can see that the shuffling continues. All right, I don't think there, oh, there it is. So only one time did it print out the same output. Every other time that I printed it, it was a little different in one way or another. So that's what I mean by a set is more of a storage system that just randomly throws things in. And just like it randomly throws things into the storage, whenever I go to call its contents, it displays it by random. Think about it kind of like those, is it bingo? I'm not sure what it's called, where people just put a bunch of balls inside of this massive thing and they spin it and all the balls just get rambled up in there, right? Well, just like you're throwing balls in there at random, whenever you go to grab them out, you're just grabbing them at random and throwing them out. Right? That's essentially how the set here is working. But we also want all of those to be unique. Otherwise, you could have multiple people with winning numbers. All right. So now let's go ahead and talk about adding to this set, right? Or adding to a set. I have my empty set there. So I'm going to utilize empty set dot add. I'm not appending. I'm not just using the plus sign. I have to utilize the specific method that says, hey, I want to add something into my set. Now let's print our empty set. Well, now when I print my empty set, it has the letter S in it. Well, what happens if I repeat this line of code. Instinctively, I would think that this would have two S's inside of it. But when I execute my code, we can see that an error wasn't thrown. So I don't have to do any sort of error handling to ensure that there's no doubles. But we can also recognize that there isn't two S's. So I took the first command. I said, hey, I want to add an S in there. So here's my set. I said, I want to add an S in there. And my set runs the evaluation and says, well, I'm currently empty. So I don't have any content. So let's go ahead and take in that S. And then I pass in the second command on line 100 where I'm saying, hey, I want to add an S in there again. Well, my set takes a look inside of the storage and it says, well, I already have one. I don't need another one, but thank you. And it just ignores it, drops it. I don't need it. And all that stays inside of the set is one instance of that S character. All right. Does anyone have any questions regarding sets?
Yeah, when should I use the sets? And is this advantage for the set? It take less storage, I mean less memory.
Yeah, so when you should use the set, I try to reference a specific problem. A very common program or algorithm that I've seen or encountered a couple of times is iterate through this string and return a list of the individual characters in there, right? So let's say I had something like that. And we haven't gone into iteration just yet. So if this for loop looks a little confusing, it's to be expected. I will try to make it as simple as possible, right? So let's say my string, and let's say I just have a ridiculous amount of characters, right? Whoever gave me this problem isn't the most friendly person, and they just wanted to make it difficult. Maybe they have a couple of special characters in there. And they're telling me, I want you to iterate through the string and return to me a list of all the different characters that are within this string. And I want you to ensure that there is no multiples. All right, well, in order to do that, I would have to iterate through the string. So one, I would have to create an answer. So I have my answer be empty. Then I would iterate through the string. So for character in my string, and I would say if character not in answer, then answer dot append character. All right, and then maybe at the end of this function, I just put my return statement. For now, let's say I do a print statement and do answer. All right, if I run this here, we can see that it worked. It was able to return to me each one character without an instance. But let's take a look at what's going on here in the code, right? I'm not only iterating once, I'm iterating through this entire string, right? There's really nothing I can do about that. I would have to iterate through the string in order to start building it together, right? Or in order to start building my answer. So this part is necessary. But what about this part? What's going on here? I'm checking if the character is inside of my answer. So even though I'm not writing it as a for loop, under the hood, I'm iterating through this array. So not only am I going from 0 all the way to the end for my string, I'm also going from 0 all the way to the end of my answer. And keep in mind that my answer is growing, actively growing as the string grows. Right? That's not necessarily what I want. So to make things much more simpler for me, I can create a set. And rather than checking if something is within my answer, well, I know my set is not going to allow multiple instances of something. So I could say answer.add character. And I could print, if I want it within a list, I could say I want you to print a list of my answer. And we'll see that I'll get back the same exact answer with no repetitive characters within it. But now I'm not iterating twice. I'm only iterating through one structure. Does that answer your question, Murat?
Of course, you are smarter than me. Okay. Yeah, I like that. But again, what the difference between both of those? I see it the same, right? It give the same answer. I know what you mean. I get the idea, but why you it give the same answer?
Yeah, they give the same answer, but they don't have the same behavior. In one of them,
I know it didn't iterate over the answer set array or the answer. It didn't iterate again in whatever. In the beginning, it was iterating over the my string and iterating over the answer list, right?
right?
And now it just iterating over my string.
Yes, now it's only iterating over my string.
Okay, why did you do that? What the difference? Or what this will make difference?
Ah, I see. So the difference
Okay.
is in efficiency. And as far as it's something called big O complexity, which we'll be covering here here shortly once we go into our data structures. It has to do with time and space complexity. The more loops that I have, the longer it's going to take for my program to come to an answer.
Okay, yeah, that's good one. Yeah, I just was asking Adam something, yeah, similar to this. Thank you very much.
Of course. All right, everyone. That's going to conclude our stats portion. Oh, I see I have another question. Go ahead, Brandon. Yeah, if you're talking, you're muted.
Could you cast my string to a set and do that without necessarily the for loop?
My string to a set. Let's try that out. Actually, I don't know.
I have that answer in the comment section, actually. What
Oh.
you're asking?
So are you saying that you can do that? Oh, so you would have to turn it into a list first and then turn it into, that makes sense. So I turn the string into a list to make it
I'm not sure if you have to do it as a list first, but that's just what I did. You might be able to get away with doing a set operation on it. I haven't tried it though.
Yeah, let's see.
Ooh.
You can.
I guess it works.
You could do this all in one line then. Nice. Good question, Brandon. All right.
This is why set is so powerful. You can just get the unique items like in one line.
Yep. All right, everybody. So now that we've gone over all this information, the last thing that we're going to be covering before going into functions and all of our intermediate material, or actually functions is next, then we go into our intermediate or functions and iterations. Oh, okay. We are definitely running out of time. Let's go into our functions. So in JavaScript yesterday, when we finished our functions, we talked about arrow functions and how we are going to be writing functions as such. Function, the name of the function, parameters, if any, body of function, and then return, if any. All right, so this is what we covered yesterday about how we'll be writing functions in JavaScript. Well, when we write functions in Python, we're gonna use a special keyword called define. All right, so let's say I want to define a function, and just like yesterday, I had a function that I wanted to define, which was add to. So I'm going to go ahead and write my add to function here, which is going to take in a number. So that's my parameter. Instead of curly brackets, like we see here, I'm actually utilizing my colon. And then from there, I will return num plus 2. All right, so I just defined a new function. This is going to be the standard for Python, and I'm indenting the body of the function. Instead of putting it between curly brackets, it's being identified as the body of the function by the indentation. All right. So let me go ahead and take this a step further here. I'm gonna grab this out of the curriculum for efficiency purposes, and I will also share this in X-ray questions for anybody following along, so you could grab it. All right. So we're gonna paste this function here. Let's break down this function. We're saying, hey, I want a function that can tell me what country if I can drink, and depending on the country that I am, it should tell me true or false, right? Obviously, this doesn't go over every single country. It looks like it's just Canada and Antarctica, and then else it's false. So let's see, if age is greater than or equal to 21, or, right, so there's our or statement, age is greater than or equal to 18, and the country is Canada, then it should say true. Else, if the country is Antarctica, it should say true as well. And then finally, else is equal to false. So the thing that I want everybody to pay attention here is the indented blocks, right? There's nothing crazy about this function or how it's been made. If we run it, we can see that it's able to execute correctly and return the correct statements of false, true, and true. But please pay attention to these blocks, right? We defined our function. We say, hey, you're going to accept 2 arguments. And then I start doing some conditional statements. Every time there is a colon, it should be followed by an indented block to represent the body of that portion. In JavaScript, we utilize curly brackets. Again, in Python, we are going to utilize indentation to signify blocks of code. Does anyone have any questions over how to write a function in Python?
Yes, sir. I have a small question.
Of course.
Okay, I just don't want to be confused with the double equal or one equal. Okay, so when you use the comparison here, I noticed that you use the double equal, or always the comparison has 2, like one like equal and greater than or less than. So that means I cannot use one equal, right? One equal here in Python will be only to assign variable.
That's correct. Using one
Okay.
sign is only for assignment.
For assign in the Python. Okay. Because yesterday you said in JavaScript we can use double equal or triple equal, right? For comparison.
Yes. So I said you want to utilize triple equal, but you do have the capability to run both, where double equal is loosely comparison and triple equal is strict. In Python, we only have strict comparison.
Okay, so we cannot use, if we use like one equal, it will make error, right?
If you use one equal, you assignment.
No, not an assignment. I mean in the comparison,
if you try to do it within the comparison, yes, it would throw an error.
I think he disconnected.
Oh, did he drop?
Yeah, he like disappeared while he was talking.
All right, Urjan?
So I'm a little confused on how how the second print returned into true.
How the second print statement returned true. All right, let's take a look at that. All right, so the second print statement, here we go. All right, so this comes through. We have age 21 and USA. All right, so if age is greater than or equal to 21, so this is already true. So since this is true, everything here on the right-hand side becomes useless. This doesn't exist. The left side of my OR has evaluated to true. So this if statement gets triggered and returns true. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yeah, thank you.
Of course. All right. So now that we've gone over how to write a function, let's start going over some of our intermediate Python content. All right, so for intermediate Python content, let's start with our switch cases, since we're already here in these conditionals. So if I had something where, I don't know, maybe I have age is, or maybe I have a list of people, right? and I have names. Well, in this case, my name is Francisco. And maybe I want to assign roles in this program. And I'm kind of just thinking this off the top of my head. So this example should fill in what we want. Let's go ahead and start building our switch case now. So our switch case works almost exactly like if, well, it works almost exactly like switch statements. It's just syntactical sugar. It doesn't really bring in any sort of, oh, this is more efficient or this is preferable. It's definitely what you prefer as an individual. Right, so let's say I have this variable named, it's Francisco, and I want to match this name to a specific scenario. Well, these scenarios can have cases. And there could be multiple amount of cases. So let's say that we have 3 cases, right? Let's say if the name is Francisco, then what we should do is we should print, hello, Francisco. If the name is, let's say, Adam, let's go ahead and print, welcome, Maestro. And maybe we have a default. Again, the underscore is typically used for something that, you know, covers pretty much any edge case, or it's kind of like a filler. In our match case, this is going to be our default statement, right? So if these 2 cases didn't get meet, this is my last trigger, the one that you'll default to. So in this case, I'll just say print. I have no idea who you are. All right. So now if I go to execute this script, we can see that hello Francisco is triggered. Well, that's because name is equal to Francisco. If I were to make this Adam, we can see that it shows me welcome Maestro, because name is equal to Adam. And then finally, if I were to put a bunch of gibberish here, then it would just tell me, hey, I have no idea who you are. All right. Go ahead, Matt.
I noticed that, or I'm not seeing where you're actually calling match. Like when we define a function, we have to call that function to execute it, but the match is executing on its own.
Got it. Yeah. So that's a really good observation. So match, just like you said, it's pretty much executing on its own, right? And it's the way that I like to think about it is a runtime kind of thing. So when I make a function is made. And let me actually start by saying this.
Oh, it's the same thing as using a print statement. It'll automatically run during runtime.
Exactly.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
The structure is just a little different, so it threw me off a bit.
Yeah. So my script, when I make a variable or I make any sort of a function, it gets saved, but it doesn't get executed. So I'm just going to put those as green. And then there's execution functions or execution methods, right? Such as like Brandon mentioned, we have our print statement that actually gets executed, and match just happens to be one of those. When you run a match, as soon as it meets the match keyword, it starts executing the body. Kind of like our if and else statement right up here.
It's
So
kind
if
of like
we-
the
if-
switch case in JavaScript. Instead of switch, you just have match. I mean, it functions differently. The syntax is different, but it's kind of the same idea, isn't it?
It's yes, it's exactly the same thing. It's just different syntax for each individual language. All right.
Can we have 2 match?
Can you have 2 match statements? Yeah, you definitely. Yeah. So I can copy and paste that down below and maybe I'm just going to change this a little bit.
No, I mean not 2 match. I'm sorry. I mean 2 case. The same case.
Yeah, we
Like
have,
if yeah, like if you have Francesco, hello Francesco, and then another case Francesco, do something else, do something different.
got it. So you can have two cases that mimic the same. It's just not gonna work for you. What I mean by that is I can write it, and Python is not gonna throw an error and let me know that I made a mistake. But when I go to execute this, we're gonna see that it doesn't populate, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and execute my script here. We can see that only hello Francisco was met. It's working just like the if and else statements, right? Once one condition is met, the remainder of the conditions that are specified within the match are being ignored.
So essentially, when it chooses a case, you know, I'm just going back to JavaScript and kind of compare this to you just as an idea. At the end, you have the break, but in here, you don't have the break. The break is kind of implied. It breaks out of the code and jumps back to whatever it was running.
Right. So in JavaScript, I have to explicitly say, hey, this block of code is done. Go ahead and break out of it and go back to check the next case. Here, it's just reading it. It's identifying blocks of code by the indentation. It checks the body if it does match the case. If it doesn't match the case, it just moves on to the next one. John?
So, is it necessary to have the underscore in there, or it can be any other character?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's go ahead and change this for maybe another character. If I change this for a specific character, let's say I do I, right? We can see that I turned blue. Well, if I try to execute this, it goes through and it's still returning the correct thing. And it's weird because I definitely expected that to throw an error. But it
What
looks
if you
like
put the gobbledygook back in the name? Change your name so that it won't pick up.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, could you say that one more time?
Leave the I,
Mhm.
and then
And change
above where you have name equals Francisco, change it to the gobbledygook you had before. Like change it to all the just whatever. Just change the. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, I'm definitely surprised that it was able to trigger and go all the way through. Because I would assume that if it was something other than underscore, it would try to actually set a value. But it looks like this is just a variable that you can
Semantic sugar.
default. Yep, some semantic sugar. It actually makes me wonder what I actually is at this point. Ah, so it looks like it's just referencing the original match statement itself.
Hmm.
Well, that's good to know. Did that answer your question, Original?
Yes, thank you.
Of course. All right, everyone. So now that we covered our switch cases, the next part that we're going to move into is our lambda functions. And actually at this point, I'm going to make a new script. I don't want our scripts to get too congested. So let me name this intermediate.py. And let's code intermediate.py. All right, so again, I'm going to make my add2 function. It's going to take in a number, and it's going to return num plus 2. All right, if I try to execute this function, I know that it's going to work, right? I could say add2 and try to execute it, and we'll see that it works perfectly well. I see 4 showing up in my terminal. That's good. But just like yesterday, when we worked on arrow functions and learned through mapping, there's got to be an easier way to write something that's this simple, right? I shouldn't have to utilize 2 lines of code for something that simple. Well, there is. Let's say I want to do result of 2. And I'm actually going to set this to something called a lambda function. Now, a lambda function is just saying, hey, you're going to do this to the following function. And I apologize, I am doing this wrong. I am establishing the function. So I'm going to say add2, which is a function. I'm going to comment these 2 out. And I'm saying, hey, this is a lambda function. Now, this is just shorthand for what's going on up above. So if I want to represent num, well, I can just do num. And then after that, I can put what it is that my return statement is going to be. Just like I have num plus 2, I can write num plus 2. Now, down below, if I execute this code again, print add 2, and pass in the number 2, we're going to see that it works exactly the same. It still returns 4. It's doing the same thing up as above. I'm just, rather than using the define keyword, I'm utilizing lambda. I'm still establishing the variable. I could have multiple variables if I wanted to, but I'm still establishing the one variable that I need, and then adding 2 for my return statement. That is the simplest version of lambda function, but we're going to see that over and over again once we go into mapping, filter, and sorting. Does anyone have any questions over this so far?
Is the purpose of this just for like just less code because you just write it in one line?
Yeah, it's basically just for less code. Again, if you're sacrificing readability for lines of code, stick to readability. Readability will always trump any sort of shortcut. Does that answer your question?
Okay. Is this sort of like the shortcut in JavaScript where you had the arrow? That's what we're doing the same thing, just shortening it like that, or is it a different concept?
Yeah, it's exactly the same thing where I would have the
My mic is working.
Oh, I'm gonna go ahead and mute that.
Okay.
All right, so now I'm gonna go ahead and write add 2 is equal to num. And what I wanted to do is return num plus 2. All right, so that's the equivalent of this in JavaScript. And I believe I forgot my const here on the left-hand side. Does that answer your question there, Cody?
It does, yeah, that clears it up. Thank you.
Of course.
So is there a time complexity for this? For lambda?
No, this doesn't really change your time. This doesn't change your time complexity. All right. So now that I have this information, let's go ahead and start talking about some sorting and the different functions that we can work with our list. So yesterday we learned about mapping in JavaScript. Well, what about mapping in Python? This is really useful, right? Because we know that we need to map. So let's say my list of staff. And honestly, at this point, I wish I had a list of staff written somewhere so I didn't have to write this. All right, let's see. We have Adam. There was Raphael. There was Zainab. And finally, there was Benjamin. All right, so there we go. We have our list of staff there. Well, I want to map through each one of these and do some sort of functionality, just like I did in JavaScript. All right. Well, in JavaScript, all I did was I would say I want to call the list of staff and I want to utilize .map. I would then pass in a representation of each member. So I would say member. And I could say I want to return member dot to uppercase to have all of my members being in uppercase in a new Python, right? Or in a new array. Well, now I want to do this with a list. Well, I have my list of staff. Let's say I want list or staff upper. And I'm going to make this equal to the mapping function. Again, it's pretty similar. You'll see here shortly. I am mapping. I am going to give a representation of what it is that I want to do to each one of them. So here's a lambda function, just like we do arrow functions on saying, hey, Here's a lambda. I'm passing in a representation of each staff. So I'm going to say member. And then I'm going to say what I want to return. Well, I want to return each member going to upper. Well, originally here, when I utilize the mapping method, it's coming straight from my list of staff. But down below, I'm never referencing my list of staff. So where do I do that? Well, if we hover over mapping, it's going to tell me that it needs 2 arguments, all right? So here it tells me, hey, first I want to know what function is it that you want me to execute for whatever it is that I'm going to iterate. And the second argument is I want you to tell me what it is that I'm going to iterate through. All right, so I told you my function. There it is in lambda. Well, now the variable that you're going to iterate through is my list of staff. So rather than having list of staff at the beginning, I have it at the very end as the second argument of my mapping function. Now, if I print my staff dot upper or my staff upper, and I run my script, we can see that it comes back as a mapping object. All right, well, that's not necessarily what I expected. Why is it coming back as a mapping object? Well, notice the map is in green, and it tells me this is a class instance. We'll go a little bit more in detail as to what's going on here. But essentially, this is telling me, hey, you conducted a map operation, and we stored the result of that mapping operation at this address inside of your computer memory. So that's great and all, but it's not letting me read its contents. So in order to read its contents, all I need to do is turn it into a list. And there we can see Francisco, Adam, Raphael, and Zainab, all uppercase. All right, let me do a quick review here before I open up for questions. I know that was a lot of content. So first, we created our list of staff. Then I gave you a quick example over what it would look like in JavaScript. We would call the array itself, call the mapping method that belongs to the array, pass in a representation or a variable for each one of the indexes of that array, and then give the operation that I want to happen, the function that I want to happen to each one of those indexes, and this would return a brand new array. All right, well, the mapping function has a similar functionality. Right, so mapping can only be done over iterable objects, but it doesn't necessarily belong to an array. I know this because when I hover over it, it just says, hey, I only need something that is iterable. All right, so now I pass in a function, which is the first argument. It needs to know what the function is going to be. The function that I created was it would have a member as a variable, and that member would then go to upper. And then finally, I'm telling it what to conduct this behavior to. So I'm telling it list of staff is going to be where you're going to be conducting this behavior. So this mapping function iterates through each one of the indexes of my list of staff and turns each one of them into all uppercase letters. All right, great. Well, map is a class in itself. So when I start the instance of the class, or I create the instance of a class, the result gets saved inside of my computer memory. That's what we saw here. Was this map object apps, whatever, all right? So this is telling me there is an object of class map, and I have it stored at this location in your computer, in your machine. Well, thanks for letting me know, but I actually want to see the contents inside of it. So in order to see the contents inside of this object, I cast it back into a list to be able to see each individual index of that list and the result of my map function. All right, let's open up the floor for some questions. Murad?
That was a great explanation. Okay, I got it. But I just have one question.
Mhm.
I noticed something called class. Okay, but I didn't get what the class mean. I never seen that before.
Yeah, that's a great question. So classes, I don't want to answer this question just yet. We're going to be going into OOP next week, and if I start talking about this material, we're going to open the rabbit hole of what object-oriented programming is and how it works. So I'm going to go ahead and store that one away until we start our OOP lectures on Monday.
Yes, okay, no problem. So you gonna explain it to us, right? Next week. Yeah, but not today.
Adam,
Okay, that's it.
covering my content, correct.
Thank you
Yep.
very much. That was great explanation, by the way. Thank you.
Monday. Classes, Monday.
There you go. All right, Brandon?
I have two questions. So since the first argument takes a function, instead of putting a lambda function in there, can you just put a regular function in there, like the def add two function you have at the top if you defined it?
Yeah, let's try it out, right? So if I do my def by 2 function at the top, right? It's been defined. Well, let's go ahead and try to pass it in, right? Let's say I want to do my add 2 function to each one of them. I think this will work. Let me check this real quick. I think this is going to throw an error. Yeah, it does throw an error. Let me see. I'll just do this. Aha. All right, so let me go ahead and run my script now. So you can see that I defined the function up above, and it was able to accept that, right? I don't necessarily have to state a lambda function. I could create an entire function that just accepts one or more variables. If it accepts multiple variables, then your nested list, you need to have nested lists inside of there to ensure that each index can fulfill the requirements that you need for that function to work.
You don't need parentheses in there to specify that it's a function when you add two.
Yeah.
Or like next. Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Second question was, can you just wrap the entire map function call with list to just like skip a step?
You definitely can. Yeah. I can go ahead and say list. And just to emphasize, I'm not skipping a step. Everything's still happening, right? This is still getting saved as an object inside of memory space. And I'm then casting it to list, right? It starts from the very beginning. The very first function being called here is map. Map goes and executes each one, or executes the function for each one of the indexes within the list. Once it has all of those return statements, it stores its result inside of the machine as an object, and then it gets turned into a list.
Sorry, I didn't mean skipping a step. I meant like having to rewrite the code if you have to do it again later.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. Did that answer your question?
Thank you.
Chris?
I had a question about the function lambda. So I see it in the group. I'm just now reading in the chat. It's used as notation to find anonymous functions. Is useful for functions passed as a function for like map or sorting. Okay. Yeah, I just never seen that function before. And you can only use that in Python, I'm assuming. Is there a correlation, something like that in JavaScript?
Yeah, the arrow functions. So I have an example right here that demonstrates both of them. So here's our arrow function inside of JavaScript. And then here's an example of our lambda function inside of Python.
Got you. Oh, okay. Cool. Thank you. And another thing too, I was trying to find the recordings of the last class yesterday, and I couldn't find it on YouTube. So I don't know if I'm hitting something wrong because I seen the YouTube page, but I didn't see. I don't know whatever. So yeah, is there another channel for this recording or?
Yeah, I'll definitely address that question once we get to our break or once we conclude the first portion of our lecture. But I am starting to run out of time. I apologize, Chris.
No, you're good.
Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, so you were able to call the add to function, but how come you're able to call it when you haven't really called num and add to? Is it because list of staff is supposed to be the argument being passed in add to?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the mapping function only needs to know what function is it that I want to execute for each one of the indexes inside of my list or my iterable object, right? So how exactly is it working? Because I'm not calling it, right? Well, the map function or the map class here is what's calling it for me. So what's happening under the hood, I wonder if it will show it for me inside of the init method. Nope, not showing it. All right, so what's happening under the hood, and let me see if I could draw this out. Where did my function drawing go? There you are. And let me go ahead and grab Jeepers Creepers. All right, so what's happening under the hood is mapping is taken in the function and the iterable object. So these are the two elements that's inside of my map, right? It knows the function that it's supposed to have, and here's my iterable objects. Well, when it goes and tries to utilize the function against the iterable object, it expects the only reason why I would be utilizing this mapping function with a function inside of it is if I'm trying to conduct a behavior. So it's going to assume that the function that I'm passing into it is ready to accept the valid inputs. So map, as it goes to the first index, it's going to grab the first individual index, pass it into the function, and then build a new list with the outcome of said function. Jesus. There you go. And then it's going to repeat that process. Then passes in the next one, then the next, and then the next, until it's done iterating. Once it's done iterating, it then saves this outcome array inside of my memory space. So even though I'm not calling the function, I am giving it to map so that it knows, oh, this is the function that you want me to utilize. Let me start passing arguments into it to create my new list. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and that's why you don't need to call for the argument num, because the argument is list of staff.
Exactly.
But you who made the list, right? You have to make the list.
Yes, you could either make the list yourself or you have to know the contents of the list. What I mean by that, later on we'll be working with responses from APIs. As long as I know what I'm doing and what it is that my function is expecting, I can create the behavior and pass it in as an argument.
Thank you.
Of course. I could have swore I saw another hand up. Does someone else have a question? How is clicking on types and opening that README?
Yes, you clicked on list and it gave you like a dash help. And that was crazy.
Are we talking about this?
Yeah, whoa, that is amazing. Built-ins. That is amazing.
How did you get that one?
So extensions, I mean Pylance.
Pylance? Okay.
Pylance extension.
Thank you.
All right. Oh, go ahead, Urjan.
Are we gonna go over the structuring?
We are not going to be covering destructuring in this lesson or the next one, but we will go into destructuring inside of our OOP module with Python.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. All right. So let's continue moving forward here. We've done quite a bit, and it looks like we have a pretty good idea of what the mapping function is doing. Well, let's move on into our next iterative function here, which is going to be filter. All right. So just like mapping does something to create a new array, filter does exactly that. You can use dir and help as well. Oh, that's for something else. All right, got it. Filter is going to do exactly its name. It's trying to filter the contents of the list to make sure that we're only getting back something that meets a specific criteria. So for the filter, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a list of numbers instead. So LSD of nums. And let's do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right. So now let's say I'm working with a ridiculous amount of numbers. Some of you might have already worked on a problem named FizzBuzz, where you have to iterate through 1 through 100. And, you know, it's just too much content. I don't want to have to deal with all of that. So maybe I want to shorten up the list that I'm going to be running some complex logic on to ensure that I get my accurate result. Well, I'm going to filter my list. And in order to filter that list, I'm going to do it very similarly to how I did my lambda function. And let me bring that back here. There. All right. So I'm going to say nums divisible by 2. And I'm going to make that equal to a list. And actually, let's take that one step at a time. I'm going to filter. Now let's take a look at what filter takes in. Again, filter accepts a function and then an iterable data type. All right. Awesome. So if filter accepts a function and iterable data type, then first I have to establish my function. So let's say I want to make a lambda function that only returns something if it's divisible by 2. How could I do that?
Lambda.
Using modulus.
I think there was a couple of people talking. If you want to go ahead and take, I think that was Len first.
I wasn't talking. I'm good.
So you do lambda.
All right, let's do lambda.
And then num. Give a colon in there.
All right.
Now we want to actually do what we want to do. So num divided by 2 or modulus 2, sorry.
Modulus.
All right, so modulus 2. For anybody who's not familiar with the modulus symbol and what it does, it essentially returns the remainder, right? So if 1 divided by 2 returns 0.5, then what I would get back is 0.5. And that's what would actually fall within the modulus. It goes into the leftovers, right? So modulus 2, what am I evaluating here?
Equals 0. If num modulus 2 equals 0.
Right,
Okay.
equals 0. Or double, yeah.
So I want to make sure that it is equal to 0. Great. So I have my lambda function. It's only going to return the elements that meet this requirement. So if it goes through 1 and it's divisible and it divides it by 2 and we get back 0.5, well, it's going to say this isn't equal to 0. We're not going to return that element. When it moves on to 2, it's going to be equal to 0. So it will return that element and so on. All right. The second argument of filter is my iterable data structure or data type. Go ahead, Brandon.
List of nums.
I think I talked over you. All right, Daniel.
Yeah, just for clarification, so lambda num is basically saying you're defining it, so it's or you're making it as a function, so it'd be function of num and then the parameters of num, right?
Right, so something like this. So return num if num modulo 2 is equal to 0, else none.
All right, thank you.
Of course. All right, so there we see the function that we're passing in here. That's a lambda function. I heard a couple of pops. Go ahead, Brandon.
So just for clarification, because I have seen anonymous functions being like that term being thrown around. So lambda is strictly replacing that def div underscore 2. So it's getting rid of you having to write that for line 12. Yeah, it's getting rid of def div underscore 2. So that would be equal to lambda, because anonymous means it's not named. Okay.
So pretty much this entire line here on line 12 is the equivalent of this here.
Gotcha. And lambda is just it's semantic.
What do you mean by semantic?
So it doesn't, like, when we call lambda, we're basically saying we don't really care about the nomenclature for this function, but we do want it to do something.
Right. So this is
So-
just a quick way to create a function that we're going to throw away immediately.
Okay.
I want to
Right.
define it.
And it can only have one line. It can only do one calculation. They can't do like multiple. It can't do multiple calculations. Lambda is in place. It can be it can be thrown into function calls. I put a link in the chat for lunch. It goes through all the things and it covers it pretty well. I mean, it does a pretty good job of describing what it is so that we can, because of all the data going on here.
All right. Perfect. So now that I've gotten up to this point, my second argument is going to be my iterable. So I'm going to
List of nums.
my list of nums. And
And we create.
When I print my nums divisible by 2.
We have to create list, right?
Yeah, we would have to create a list because again,
Yeah.
this is a class object.
Yeah.
Nice. And yeah, great catch, Erica. I'll be covering the range function here once we go over loops and iteration, which I don't think it's going to happen prior to lunch, unfortunately. All right. So just like Murad mentioned, we want to make sure that we turn this into a list. Currently, right now, it's saved as an instance of a class within my machine. So when I print it, it's just telling me a memory address. But once I turn it into a list, it returns to me the specific numbers that were actually divisible by 2. All right. So there is our filter function. The next one we're going to be working with, and likely our last one before lunch, is going to be the sort function. I am tracking that we have reduce there, but for reduce, we have to import functools. So to keep things simple and kind of follow the same pattern, we're going to go ahead and move into sorting, specifically because of the example that we have here in our curriculum. I'm actually going to grab that people dictionary list or list of dictionaries. I apologize. I'm going to share it with everybody here on the chat as well inside of X-ray questions. So everybody has access to it. I'm going to post it as well. All right. So there you go. We have my list of people. Now, let's say I want to sort this list of people by different keys, different key values, right? Well, that's something that we can solve with lambda as well. I want to specify for the sort function how exactly it's going to define the sorting functionality. Where is it that I'm going to find what you want me to sort? Well, remember, this is still just a list, right? So now let's go ahead and run a print statement. And this is actually going to take us into constructive and destructive methods. So we'll talk about that here shortly. So I'm going to go ahead and run people dot sort, and I'm going to pass in, it already tells me what it needs, right? So here we go. So dot sort is a method that belongs to the list, and it takes in 2 things. So one, a key, what this is supposed to work through, and if it's going to work through this in reverse. And then it tells me by default, the reverse variable will always be set to false. Okay, good. But this is a little bit more complicated because this isn't just, I'm not just sorting something alphabetically. Like I don't have a list of string and I don't have a list of numbers. I have a list of objects. So I have to return something that can actually be sorted, right? So I'm going to utilize the lambda function to do that. I'm going to say, hey, for everything inside of this list, I want you to iterate through each individual dictionary, and I want you to return the dictionary at key of age. So it's going to sort through this list of dictionaries. It can't sort dictionaries, but it can sort numbers. I currently don't just have numbers, and I apologize, I missed my key here. It needs to know how to identify the key. So to identify the key, I specify a function that will grab the dictionary. Each individual element of my list is a dictionary, and it will return the value for the key of age. All right. So now let's print people, and let's print people down below. Let's take a look here. So in the first print of people, we see name, Alice, age 44, pretty much the same exact thing that I created. We have name Bob, age 49. But down below, when I go to sort, it sorts them from youngest to oldest. We have Carol first, then Alice, and then finally Bob. All right. So we can see how I was able to iterate, grab each individual key, and return them in a specific order. Again, my sort method takes in two arguments, one for reverse and one for the key. Well, if I want to reverse this, I would just say reverse is true. That way, instead of youngest to oldest, I have oldest to youngest. All right. There's one other thing I would like to highlight before we go into questions here. And that's going to be, notice that we're calling the same exact array. So this dot sort method isn't creating a new array. It's actually grabbing the original data type, the original data structure, and it's rearranging its contents for us, right? It's moving them, shifting the contents of this one array, but it's not of this one list, but it's not creating a new list for us. It's still the same structure that is being changed. We're not going to have enough time to go over the second way of sorting before lunch, so we're going to put that away until after lunch. I'm going to open up the questions now for the sort method that belongs to list. Does anyone have any questions? Go ahead, Raven.
Quick question. So I know the lambda dict is the function, right? After the colon, what is that before age? What is that symbolizing or doing?
Are we talking about this?
Yep. So I know it's gonna sort it within the word for the age. Is that it's just saying function and then sort. Okay, never mind. I think I answered myself.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Let me take a look here. Let me see if I could kind of provide us a little bit of a visual aid as well. All right. So my function here is saying, my lambda function is saying, hey, we are expecting a dictionary, and all we're going to do is we're going to return the dictionary of key age value. All right, and this is how it's identifying the key, all right? So what this is doing is it takes in the first argument, and it's kind of storing everything, right? So here's, let's see, so give me a quick second, everyone. I can see a couple of questions start populating. So this is my sort function. And actually, let me make that all capital letters there. All right, so this is my sort function, right? It hasn't produced an output yet. It has to identify keys first. So my sort function is expecting a key. For that key variable, I'm telling it, hey, I can't just give you a key because I have some dictionaries. So I need to give you a way to identify something that's actually sorted, that you can put in order. So it accepts my first one. It goes through. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy and paste this. And when the dictionary, because these are all dictionaries, when they get passed through, all I'm receiving back is the numerical numbers of 44. Oh. This one should be 49. And then finally, my last number here, which should be 35. So those are the keys that are being identified. That's what my lambda function my lambda function is doing here. I'm telling it, hey, here's the list. Before you start putting anything into order, identify the keys from each individual element. Then it says, oh, okay, well, if these are my keys, these are pretty easy to put in order. So now when it goes to produce an output, and let me put this one in green, it matches, right? So it says, all right, well, if I'm not in reverse, so I'm going to go from smallest to biggest. So it says, well, this should be 35. And maybe that's the third one, right? So there I get my dictionary, where age is equal to 35. And then it repeats the process. The next one is going to be 44. Well, now I get my dictionary where age is equal to 44. And then finally, it says, all right, well, the final number that I have here is 49. So what you want is the dictionary where age is equal to 49. And that's how I get back that sorted list. Does that answer your question, Raven?
Yes, thank you.
Of course. Murad?
Yeah, that was great. But I just curious, is there any other kind of value can we, rather than the numbers, to sort our dictionary, our dictionary?
Yeah, so we have
You know,
our
you know what I mean? Yeah.
yeah, so we have our list of dictionaries, right?
Yeah.
In this case, we chose to order them
By number.
by their age, which is a number.
Uh-huh.
You can definitely sort them alphabetically as well by the key of name.
Okay. Anything else, or just alphabetically or numerically?
It's going to be alphabetic or numeric when it comes to sorted.
That's it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Of course. Daniel?
What if we just wanted like the job title? How will we exclude the name and age?
If you just wanted a job title?
Yeah, job title, but get the youngest person's job title.
If you just want the youngest person's job title. Well, that sounds like a filter and a map function put together. Right? So I would say the easiest way would do it through filter, where you would specify only the one that meets the certain conditions and then what it is that you wanted to return. I'll code that example over lunch. If you were interested to take a look, you can, but I'm not going to do that during the recorded portion of the lecture as of right now.
No, I'm okay. I just thought if there was like a way we could just implement through the lambda function.
Yeah, you definitely can. It would just fall within the filter method.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, he just want to relate the job title to the age? That's what you want to do?
I wanted to relate job title to age.
Yeah, that's what Daniel just asked.
Oh, no, so Daniel was asking if there's a way to only get back the youngest person's name and age and exclude something, which there is. We'll just have to demonstrate it after recording time. So is there any other questions regarding the content of today's lecture?
I was just curious if there's any preference when it comes to like list comprehensions. So instead of using, and I don't know if that's something we're going to cover, but instead of using like map, if you did the same sort of thing with a list comprehension for.
Yeah, that's a great question. And as far as list comprehensions, we're going to be covering that after lunch, and then we could go over which one is preferred between those two.
Cool, thanks.
Of course. All right, everyone. It is officially 12:30, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.